To everyone listening live or listening after this seminar. So we would like to welcome you to the fourth seminar within the ETIN Workstream about Innovation-Enhancing Procurement. And so far we have been listening to experiences from Sweden, from Georgia, from Norway, and from UK. So this time we would like to talk a little bit about the theories behind and twist our minds a little bit. So the title of this seminar is Rethinking Procurement. And this seminar is aimed to give us some new perspectives on innovation-enhancing procurement, and especially since we are living in a very complex world. So I'm quite sure we will hear the word complex adaptive systems more than once. And the ones facilitating this is me, I'm Jakob Lindvall, and then we have you, Lina.
And I'm Lina Svensberg from the Compare Foundation and the Digital Arena Initiative.
We both are very engaged in the ETIN network, the UNEC network for transformative innovation. And the agenda for today, if I are able to change slide, is like this. Short introduction about ETIN and why we're here, and then we will have three sequences. First of all, setting the scene with Kjell Håkan from Vinnova. Then about dynamic capabilities with Jon Mikkel, and then strategic learning with Len Keller. And most important of all, we will also leave a lot of room for reflections and discussions after those three passes, and we will do that jointly together. First, just some words about ETIN. Basically, ETIN is a network organized by the UNEC, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And it's a network where we work a lot with learning between each other. So it's a lot about peer learning and collaboration in different aspects of transformative innovation policies. And this work stream that we are attending now is one of the work streams within ETIN, focusing on innovation-enhancing procurement. And it's a part of a knowledge theme within ETIN called Innovation Ecosystems. And Lina, maybe you can tell a little bit about this specific work stream.
Yes, it's a kind of a well-known idea that that innovation-enhancing procurement has the potential to stimulate innovation, economic growth, and transformation. But the big question is how that can be done. So the idea that we have for this work stream is to create the deeper insights and provide guidance regarding these main questions. How innovation-enhancing procurement can be used as a demand-side tool to stimulate innovation for sustainable economic growth. How the governments can use procurement to shape and open new markets, stimulate innovation, and engage the private sector in finding solutions. And how can innovation-enhancing procurement be tailored to national circumstances, taking into account the different types of innovation and different users. So it's a very strong focus on how and sharing of experiences and ideas related to the how of this question. And the deliverables of this work stream will be a policy brief and a strategic roadmap later this year. Back to you, Jakob.
Yes, and having that said, why don't we move on and listen to Kjell Håkan, who will be setting the scene. And I know, Kjell Håkan, that you are in an unexpected place at the moment, but still you're able to talk, we hope. And may I ask, Kjell Håkan, are you able to show slides, or do you want to talk a cappella, so to speak?
I will look if I can share with you, if I can get the I don't know, why don't I see? I have to probably share window. Let's see, where do I have that? That's, I hope you see the window now. I will go back to the
Yes, we do.
Start page there, and share the screen if I can do that. I'm sitting in a commuter train, that's why it's so.
And for all your listeners, this is not according to plan, but we are adapting accordingly.
Exactly. We just concluded that life is what happens to you while you make other plans. And this was not my plan. And I will be talking about rethinking really public procurement and how it can be used as an innovation policy instrument to drive renewal of markets, businesses, and public services. I love to talk about complex adaptive system, but I will try to focus on right just about rethinking innovation procurement. And let's see if I can get the next slide here. Doesn't seem to. Yeah, now this is, you have heard me say many times that innovation is not limited by supply, it's limited by demand. So it's so important to really focus on how to drive demand. A common view on innovation procurement that it is defined by its output. So innovation procurement is a normal procurement process used to procure innovations. And there's also this concept about innovation-driven procurement where you drive the the procurement process by innovation. And I will show that these are basically not the concept that we should be using. There's also this discussion about pre-commercial procurement as a way of procurement innovations. It's not the procurement of R&D, and R&D is not innovation. So the main message that I would like to bring to you is that you should use procurement to drive the innovation process. Let the innovation process be what it is, but use procurement to drive it, not use innovation to drive the procurement process. And the reason for this message is the following. Innovation is so substantially different from procurement because procurement requires normally something proven. It's you make a specification of a solution or function or product. There's tenders coming in from suppliers which you evaluate by price, performance, quality, function, and so on. A high ranking that you will be picked as the winner requires fact-based support for promised properties and benefits. Now, innovation is something that does not exist. So you cannot use that kind of approach. So because in innovation, success cannot be analyzed, it can only be experienced. And here basically also complex adaptive system comes in, since market and societies are non-predictable. So an innovation procurement process has to requires an experimentally driven learning process where picking winners in beforehand does not work. And this also requires that you cannot work with matching things about single supplier, single customers. You really have to have more open kind of processes looking at who will be able to really provide you with the success that you cannot analyze in beforehand. This links to the second message is that the cost of the customer is always determined by the market. An innovation needs more than one customer to a market to become effective. Think about that. I would like to buy a car an electric car that I never would like to charge. So a supplier comes to you and said, okay, I can provide you with a car with a nuclear plant. You never have to be able to charge it, and it can go forever. And you say, why? But what about if I get some problems with it? What about maintenance service costs? Of course, this is especially used for designed for you and manufactured for you. So, and it has this kind of radioactive material. Of course, the service and maintenance will be very, very high for you because you are the only customer. And that is the way most of the IT systems are purchased today. So the suppliers' willingness and ability to scale the innovation on a market is a crucial assessment criteria in selecting suppliers, which you do usually not see. Also, innovation is a co-creation process between customer and the suppliers. So each time you interact with an innovation, you change, needs, requirements, and solutions change as you interact with a slideware, with a prototype, with the MVP, and so on. And you have to allow this co-creation process to take place between customer suppliers. So to summarize the properties of the innovation procurement process, it should drive the innovation process, not the opposite. Its design should be based on investment logic and venture development logic, not on traditional kind of consultancy and or research investment or research funding logic. Its selection logic should be based on eliminating losers and retaining potential winner, not to try pick winners in beforehand. And this is an example that you have a set of stages where you go from formulating the need, to pre-studies, MVPs, pilots, commercial solutions, and so on. And all the time you have to allow the the public side to operationally adapt itself and be influenced and influence the innovation process. At the same time, the suppliers have to be able to understand and adapt their solutions to the dialogue with the public side, but also really see to that, do they have an ability to scale it on a potential market? And if you don't adapt the process in this way, you will be failing in really using it as an innovation policy instruments. That's all, and I was able to do it before I reached the central station in Stockholm, which is the next station. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Håkan. And you will be present even though you are still in some kind of commuting mode during the whole session. So
yes,
we are really looking forward to some provoking questions from you as well when it comes along. Anyone who have any initial thoughts that you want to share with Kjell Håkan before we move on?
Crystal clear for everybody. Yeah.
We will come back to that during the discussion, but I always, when I listen to you, see that you are using this dual perspective on development, that is both on the firm side and on the purchasing side. So you really need to work with the dual perspectives during the whole process.
Absolutely. And if you don't do operational changes on the public side also, you usually cannot really utilize the full power of the innovation. And that's the same on the second side. If you don't utilize the market or create more customers, you are not really fully utilizing the opportunities and benefits of the product on the societal side.
That's very interesting. So let's keep this in mind. And especially when we listen to the next speaker, Jon Michael, and you will focus on capabilities that we need to develop to be able to use those kind of new perspectives. So let's introduce Jon Michael, or Jon Michael, I must say.
Yes, Jon Michael, thank you very much, Jakob. I just shared the screen, so while I start talking, people can check what I'm going to talk about. If someone could confirm, if you can see the slides. Is it working?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So, well, welcome everyone. Good to see you, or good that you are following us and the work we're trying to push here in the ETIN network. And thank you to Jakob and Lina and the colleagues for this invitation. And Kjell Håkan and in Lina's and Jakob's presentation, they were telling that one of the main concerns that we have within this ETIN network is to respond to the questions about how. And this is precisely what I'm going to try to present very briefly in this presentation, when we talk about how to deal with and which are the capabilities needed to move forward in innovation-enhancing procurement. Because, as you can see, and many times the discourse that we have around policy instruments in general, but in particular about innovation procurement, is about the normative goals, what we can achieve with it, which are the substantive effects, which is the transformative potential of the instruments, and that's pretty much addressed in the literature. We know that it works, and we know that we can get these transformative effects. What we don't know that much yet is about how. And that's the epistemic policy goals, how we can proceed, which are those procedural effects that are going to lead us to those substantive effects, and what is the transformation also needed within the public administration. We know that for innovation policies to work and to be effective to reach those transformative goals, it's not just enough to define a policy mix and then to put some layering, as we call it, where we add one policy instrument on top of the other, because we know that there are some interactions between policy instruments, and therefore the public sector policies cannot just play a passive role where we said, okay, this is the target, this is the transformative we want, the transformation we want, let's put some instruments and let's see what happens. So the governments and the public administration also need to change their procedural part and the way they are working inside. For example, addressing coordination issues or addressing the demand, reaching out those potential providers and customers, as Jakob was mentioning earlier. And all of these activities that are needed within the public administration, they require certain capabilities on behalf of the civil servants that are going to develop them. And that's particularly the purpose of this presentation, to present which are the capabilities that we have identified as being necessary for rolling out innovation-enhancing procurement. And what I'm going to present today stems out from a research project that we did in the context of a mutual learning exercise coordinated by European Commission in years 2017 and 18, where 15 member states, 15 countries participating, and we were working together with the representatives for the procurement entities of these 15 countries over 14, 15 months. And then we did several interviews, we ran some surveys, we developed several focus groups aiming at identifying which these capabilities could be. So these things that I'm going to present stem out from that research project. And as a result of that, we identified first, which is the archetypical innovation-enhancing procurement cycle, which are made of 4 activities. And we also identified the main challenges that public policymakers in charge of procurement projects, they face in each of these stages. So as you can see, in the first stage, and Jakob was mentioning that as well, the first stage of any procurement process is the identification of the needs, and see if there are any solutions available in the market, or if there are not any solutions available in the market that allow us to reach that goal, then we can go for innovation procurement. Then the second is about the how. How are we going to roll out that innovation procurement? What's the strategy? Which are the procedures that we are going to use? Which are the criteria we are going to use for the evaluation, for the hour criteria, etc. Then it's about the execution. And finally, once we have the solution at hand, then it's the implementation of that solution and its diffusion, so others can also use it in their procurement processes. So this rather simple and simplified procurement process also has, as we said, some challenges in each of these stages. And according to the policymakers that we work with, in the first stage, the main challenge that policymakers face is the tendency to prescribe some technical solutions. Very typical in the public sector. We have a problem, and this is the need that we have. And these are the solutions that we have already identified. But of course, the public sector also has some limited capacities, limited networks. So very often, the solutions that are better going to address the identified need, either they don't exist or they escape the radars of the public sector. So that if you set already the solution from the beginning, it limits the scope of the potential solutions that could better address the identified need. As regards the second stage and the implementation of this procurement strategy, probably very often you may have heard, I guess, for many of you, about the pre-competitive dialogues between the public sector and the companies. And in many cases, the civil servants, they have a limited ability to reach these networks, as Jakob was mentioning as well. It's about the dissemination of the needs and the diffusion of the tender that the public sector is going to launch, and establishing these competitive dialogues with this external expertise. And very often this stage is also missing, which also limits the scope and the potential of the instrument itself. Something very similar happens in the third stage, as Jakob was also anticipating that. It's a matter of co-creation, because the company has an approach and an interpretation of what is the need of the public sector. So both organizations, demand and supply, they need to work hand in hand so that what is being delivered in the end, it actually meets the needs of the public organization. And then finally, about the learnings that we can use from that and the dissemination of that solution, it's about mostly a lack of time to define the functional solutions that allow us to make a comprehensive evaluation, and the lack of time also to establish contacts and dialogues with other administrations that may have several similar needs. So as a result of that, and then what we did was several focus groups with these colleagues that participated in a mutual learning exercise, and we said, okay, now that we have the challenges, we know what is missing in this procurement process, would be the capabilities that would allow you to address those specific challenges. And as a result of that work, we identified 45 capabilities. We don't have enough time today, so I'm going to present just a very brief illustration of those capabilities. If someone is interested, I'll put you in a minute a QR code so you can scan it and you can have access to the paper. If not, please contact me and I will forward it back to you with a big pleasure. So what we introduced here was what we call the capabilities roulette. And as you can see on the right-hand side, we have the 4 main activities that constitute the innovation procurement process, what we have mentioned just earlier. And each of these activities include, each of these main stages, I would call, they include several activities, depending on the complexity of the needs that is going to be addressed. Sometimes there are more activities, sometimes less activities. That's why we put those lines, because, well, depending on the case, we will develop more or less activities. And each of these activities, they require certain capabilities. And that's where we theorized, or we introduced these 3 layers of capabilities, what we call ordinary, dynamic, and functional. So the ordinary capabilities is what we call doing, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, is doing things right. Okay, this is what the regulations say. This is a very procedural. There's a directive that tells that we have to do it this way, and that's what we do. That's what the civil servants do. And in many cases, only with those ordinary capabilities, we fall short in delivering the innovations that we need. Then the second layer would be the dynamic capabilities that later Len will also talk about, and that's about doing the right things. So it's not doing what the directive say, it's doing what we need to do in order to reach the goals that we have identified as being necessary for our administration. And then finally, the third layer, and the most complex one, of course, would be the functional capabilities, which is about doing the right things right. Okay, so we need to develop some new processes. Sometimes we need to change the internal procedures of the public administration, and on top of that, we are able to do it right. Okay, so just as an illustration, as I said earlier, we don't have the time to go through all the 45 capabilities. So here I put you some like a screenshot of the capabilities, ordinary, dynamic, and functional, that we identify for this first stage that we referred to earlier about the clarification of the needs and the missing solutions. Okay, so if we take just the first line, or since the slides are going to be available, and you have the QR code here on the right, so if you scan it, you will get directly to the paper. The ordinary capabilities, the most simple process would be, okay, we have identified the need and we have defined the need. That's right. That's what we need to do to start with the procurement process, but that's it. In the dynamic capabilities, a little bit more complex, okay, we are doing it in a participatory manner. So we involve our citizens, we involve the municipality, or we involve the government. We talk with other partners, we are coordinating the procurement process, and then we are defining that need in a comprehensive manner after the dialogue with several parties. It's a little bit more complex than the previous one. And in the third one, we have identified the needs, we have defined it, and we have translated it into functional requirements. The more functional, and within the ETIN network, we have spoken in previous sessions, so I invite you to look at that, where we have spoken about the ability of functional requirements in order to open the breadth of the potential solutions that we are going to get. So just as an illustration, I'm not going through each of these levels of capabilities. You have that in the paper, and we'll be very happy to establish dialogues with any of you if you have any doubts. But like this, we have identified 15 pairs of ordinary, dynamic, and functional capabilities, all in all 15 times 3, 45 capabilities for each of the 4 stages that we have mentioned earlier. So one of the things, and we put that as a matter of further research, and this is what we are working on at the moment, this mix of ordinary, dynamic, and functional capabilities, it also depends on the role that the public administration has to play when rolling out innovation procurement. And as a very short presentation, what we have seen is that the solutions that are needed and the problems that are being addressed mostly by public administration, they can fall into 2x2 matrix, where we have sometimes the needs are very clearly identified, and there is a consensus on the needs that we have to address. Removing plastic from the ocean, there is a clear need. Everyone agrees on that. So we would be on the right-hand side of the figure. And in other cases, the demand is fragmented, or there is no consensus about it. Limiting public transportation, limiting the transportation of cars in the city centers. There is a debate. because the people that have shops, they are saying that maybe it reduces the potential to sell their products, it reduces the demand. There is a debate there, for example. And then along the vertical axis, there are places in which the solutions already exist. So the solution is very clear. We would be on the upper part of the graph. We have plastics in the oceans. We already have the technology, so we know what we need to buy. And then in other cases, the solutions are unclear, but there is a discussion about whether this is the best solution, or in many cases, the solutions are simply not available. We have not developed the solutions yet. So depending on in which of these cells in the matrix we are located, then the states, the administration needs to roll out innovation procurement in a different way. I'm not going into the details. We also have that in the paper. So depending on the stage or in the cell and the role that the public administration needs to do, we hypothesize that probably the mix of capabilities in each case is different. In some cases, the functional capabilities should be the most complicated capabilities, should dominate the other two. In other cases, where the solution already exists and everyone is in agreement about the need as well, like in the innovation-friendly procurement, the upper right matrix, then it's about doing things right. We have the solution, we have the need, so let's do the process as we know how to do it. In other cases where the solution is contested and the need is not very clear, then the functional capabilities would have to play a major role. So it really depends on each of the cases, this mix of capabilities that we would need. So just to summarize, what we have very clear is that the public sector needs to, if we want to transform society, if we want to address the challenges that society has, the public sector also needs to consider its approach to risk taking. And this need to develop capabilities is becoming more and more urgent, given the high velocity context in which the changes are happening in society and the implicit uncertainty of many of the challenges that we are facing. We don't know how climate change is going to evolve. We don't know how equality is going to evolve given the political changes that we are having in Europe at the moment. So this requires a fast reaction on behalf of the public sector. So and for that, of course, we need to have certain capabilities. So we believe that the capabilities that we have identified initially, at least, and this research already has some years, as you saw, 2017, 2018, can provide a first step for contracting authorities to start training and developing capacity building initiatives for their employees and the civil servants. So actually we are trying to push, and this is one of the goals of the ETIN network as well, to make innovation-enhancing procurement an area of policy where actually the civil servants are professional civil servants and they know how to do innovation procurement, not only doing the right things and doing what the directives and what the regulations say, but doing the right things right, adapting to each of the case and becoming professionals of innovation and of procurement. So that's what we believe, and that's what we want to push with this ETIN network as well. So well, thank you very much again for the invitation, and a big pleasure responding to your questions later, if any. Thank you. I think you are muted, Jakob.
Yes.
Muted.
Thank you so much, Jon Mikael. It's always so interesting to hear you speaking about this. And first of all, anyone who have any spontaneous questions to Jon Mikael?
It's Kjell Håkan here. Now I'm at the office, and I probably have a better connection also. One thing that, and I like your quadrants and all, but something that I would like to have your thoughts about is what I was trying to see, that really the transformation is driven by the market and the customers and the suppliers on the market. So what I tried to say is that you are only catalyzing, you are driving, using it as a innovation policy instrument to drive the market rather than just solve the public need. So the need and the solution has to put in a societal and market perspective, and there's a lot of this kind of dynamic capability changes that really is also have to be addressed by the companies, because they have to know their role as micro players creating macro outcomes on the societal level. Now, have you looked into that, and what are your thoughts and about the involvement of the business side on this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Håkan. As I said, I didn't have the time to go through the 45 capabilities, but many of them, they deal precisely with this interaction between the public and the private sector. So one of the areas that we have clearly identified as being necessary for the deployment of innovation procurement is precisely that the needs, once they have identified, they have to be communicated before there is a tender, so that the companies can start preparing in advance as well to the tenders once the tenders are launched, and they have to develop as well their own processes in order to respond to those tenders. So that's in the planification stages of the procurement. And then later, within the implementation or the execution of the procurement process as well, it's a matter of providing the companies with life cycle methods, for example, so that it's not, the companies are not only competing based on the price of the product or the service that they have to deliver, but they also are able to assess the life cycle costs of the product or the service that they are going to provide to the public administration. Or, for example, create spaces, and this is actually something that is being discussed in many cases with the sandbox. I don't know if you have heard about the sandboxes, where you can provide a safe space where the companies can test their products, because in many cases there is another regulation that needs to be changed because of this solution being implemented. So creating these safe spaces where companies can test their products and services, or also how to respond to these functional criteria. So it's not only about the development and the definition of the functional requirements, it's also how companies are able to respond to a tender, which doesn't tell exactly the technical requirements, that opens more the breadth for potential solutions. And that, we believe, can be somehow bypassed through this constant communication before and during the procurement process. So many of the capabilities, so they also embrace the needs of the companies that eventually should respond to the tender documents.
Just a comment, and I think Lina and Jakob, we can move that, my now comment to the debate, and the discussion. But what I hear from you is, and I might misunderstand it, that you do like this kind of need analysis, and we know that there's a lot of design thinking, and then you implement the procurement process. Well, in my view, it's a dynamic that changes all the time. It's an iterative process all the time, so you cannot have a front-end process defining and a back-end process executing. They are intertwined and in consistent kind of dynamic movement if you are working with the innovation of things that doesn't exist. And it doesn't cover all the quadrants, but specifically a few of your quadrants. But I think that kind of dynamic situation is a good topic for discussion later.
Yes, just as a footnote here, our approach was to identify the capabilities on the public sector, but other colleagues, particularly in the UK, they have also addressed which are the barriers that participating companies in procurement tender space in order to actually enroll in this innovation procurement tenders. That's we identify the gap. Okay, we have the gap on the public sector. Now, more or less, we know what the companies need, and these British colleagues, they have done that work. So we wanted to focus in this paper, in particular, on the capabilities on the public sector. That's why our focus in this case was on these public capabilities. That's a footnote.
Yes, thank you very much. This is extremely interesting. So we will come back to reflections and discussions jointly. I have a lot of questions myself as well. Very interesting. But first, let's listen to you, Len, because as we heard from Jon Mikael, this is also, it's necessary to actually develop new skills. So what about learning in this process, Len? Please, the stage is yours.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
And the PowerPoint, yeah?
Yeah, it's not in presenting mode, though.
Sure. Let me just switch that in.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. Morning, everybody. And again, thanks for having me. My name is Len Keller. I sit in the University of Cambridge on a very grey and rainy day, and I'm also a member of the ETIN network. So over the last 7 or 8 months, I guess, we've been doing a project within ETIN looking at the role of strategic learning within transformative innovation in general. And from that, we've entered into some discussions with Lina and Jakob, particularly about how some of what we found in terms of how strategic learning can help transformative innovation and transformative innovation policy, how that can be applied within an innovation-enhancing procurement context. So what I'll talk to you today about, I guess, is introducing some of the concepts we've uncovered during our project, and also some initial thoughts about how we can apply that within the IEP context. So it's very much this is future work rather than work we've already done, but it gives you some kind of indication of some of the thoughts we're having, and also kind of ties in with some of the comments that Shahork and John McHale have already talked about today. So where are we at the moment, I guess, is an interesting question that we've touched on. We're focusing on in this session on how we can do things, how we can apply some of this new thinking within an innovation-enhancing procurement context. But where we are at the moment is that there's an awful lot of mission washing. And what I mean by mission washing is that a lot of the transformative innovation thinking, the mission-oriented thinking, for example, being implemented by public sector organizations without new ways of creating and using knowledge. So essentially, they're kind of focusing on the way we always do. And the implication of that is that the potential of transformative innovation policy isn't really being seized. So we're seeing kind of incremental changes here and there. We've seen some pockets of good practice, but by and large, it's business as usual. And out of that then arise a couple of questions which we talk about in this section. What kind of learning processes are necessary to foster change in a complex adaptive system? This is what we mean by strategic learning. And what are the implications for building IEP capabilities? So Jean Michel has already said that we know what these capabilities might look like, be they ordinary, dynamic, or functional. But there's an outstanding question about how you can actually go about building these capabilities. Do we know how we can do that with a degree of predictability? Or moment, I think we're probably not sure, and I think that's common not just in IEP; it's across the board for these transformative innovation type of projects. So, some high-level conceptual thinking first of all. In public administration, let me take a step back. In terms of strategy, strategic delivery, and this is the bottom side of this slide. Typically speaking, or classically speaking, where we think of strategy, we can start off with an intended strategy. This is what we intend to achieve. Some of that is realized as a deliberate strategy. So, some of the things we intend to do will be achieved. Fantastic, that's deliberate. Some of the things won't be achieved. That'll be an unrealized strategy. But there'll also be an emergent strategy component we have to think about. So these are patterns that are realized in the absence of intention. So things that kind of bubble up from the bottom up, I guess. That can, when they develop and when we think about things, or when we step back and say, does this meet our strategic direction or not? Fantastic, we can incorporate these within our realized strategies. So two main things that we need to think about, I guess, in terms of strategy. One is what's deliberate, what's realized as intended. And secondly, what's emergent, these patterns that are realized in the absence of intention. So when we apply that back up to the strategy process in public administration I'm talking about here, we can think of this as having two phases, a planning stage and an implementation stage. And ideally, those two are linked, okay? And they can be linked in terms of different types of learning. So the strategic planning phase can potentially be quite an analytical process. It doesn't necessarily need to be linked to implementation. Quite often it's not in practice. It can be a separate process. But ideally, they can and they should be linked as much as possible. In traditional policy approaches, one of the strong links is by sense giving. So essentially you're going from a planning stage, you're trying to make sense for people that are implementing this policy about what the intentions are, and then it moves on to the implementation phase. Once that this policy instrument has been completed and you're looking at evaluating the outcomes, you're typically doing that through summative evaluation. So did we achieve what we want to achieve, essentially? What you're not doing typically is learning through the strategy implementation process so that you can adjust as you go. Okay, so that's a traditional way of looking at these things. When you start thinking about transformative innovation, it becomes much more nuanced, and it's much more complicated in terms of the learning process that you need. Okay. So Shalokan mentioned earlier on that one of the principles behind what we're talking about today is uncertainty. So we exist in complex adaptive systems, be they societies, be they markets, and because of that, predictive approaches don't tend not to work. And so you need to experiment to find out, not to pick winners, but to pick the willing and to eliminate losers, essentially, to kind of figure out what works so that you can then diffuse that knowledge and scale up that knowledge. I'm going to focus on two types of experimentation. One is called Darwinian. Principle about behind that is basically you want to increase variation. You want to have lots and lots of experiments going on. Within a portfolio, within a system experimentation. And the idea behind that is you're trying to identify the experiments that are working, the ones that are most promising, and also the ones that don't show much promise so that you can start eliminating. The second type of experimentation, which I'll talk about, is generative experimentation. And that's different because you're looking at one single experiment. You're not looking at a portfolio. You're focusing on one single one. And you're trying to refine that solution as you go. You're trying to make it better and better and better as you go. Okay? So those are the two types of approaches we'll be talking. Focusing on Darwinian, the types of learning process, well, sorry, take a step back first of all. Our strategic process within this transformative innovation context. We're breaking the strategic planning section into two. One is some type of orientation to agreed directionality, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, just to kind of figure out that you are doing what you should be doing the right things, I guess, going back to Jean Michael's talk. Some type of policy coordination and governance arrangements. So again, here you're looking not just at coordinating the resources you have internally as a public sector organization, but you're looking at a series of experiments in a portfolio. So you're trying to coordinate that series of experiments within this directionality. And finally, the policy implementation stage is as is. The learning processes that you need along that process for Darwinian experimentation include sense giving, which we already talked about, but in this context, you're looking at aligning multiple experimental activities and crowding the willing. So you're looking at things like setting visions, missions, all that. At the policy implementation stage, you're focusing on trial and error learning. You're trying to identify the most and least promising experiments. And then the feedback loop from policy implementation to policy coordination and governance. You're looking at things like learning by monitoring. So you're selecting the most promising experiments. You're looking at collective learning to diffuse that knowledge among this group of stakeholders that you have involved in the experimentation process. And you're looking at systems thinking, essentially trying to understand systems dynamics as well. So those are the learning processes as feed forward and feedback loops for Darwinian experimentation. Looking at the other type of experimentation I mentioned, generative experimentation, it's a little bit different. Okay, so here you're going directly from policy orientation, your directionality piece, directly to the implementation phase itself. You're trying to do that through a thing called transformative social learning. And this type of learning is new in policy. It's not associated with a traditional approach to policy. You're looking to use that to translate and to interpret your agreed directionality at a team level, essentially, at a level of the people who are at the coalface, who are at the process of designing experiments and implementing experiments. Within the implementation phase itself, you've got different types of learning going on here as well. You've got learning by doing, which is traditional a policy style of learning. This is about refining solutions as you go within a certain degree of uncertainty, a mild uncertainty. But you're also delving into new types of learning here as well. So first order learning is continuous improvement. Second order learning is more cognitive. It's about challenging assumptions and mindsets to try to ensure that people within that experiment are focusing on the right things to do. So essentially here, for example, you're looking at, is it right to do, say, fossil fuel innovation when you could be doing innovation in green technology, even though there might be less of a return? That kind of conversation you're driving. There's also a more fundamental type of learning to think about, which is third order learning, which is about transcending existing rules. So one of the conversations we're starting with Lina and Jakob at the moment is the difficulties of kind of bringing in this new type of thinking to public sector organizations that are quite embedded and quite locked in to their traditional ways of thinking, traditional ways of doing things. One of the reasons for that is the difficulty of trying to instill or trying to spark second order learning and third order learning, so that you can get change within an organization, within a public sector organization that isn't necessarily used to change like this. And one final type of learning is unlearning, which is a type of learning that facilitates the abandoning of obsolete practices and habits. So again, there can be a lot of focus about bringing in new ways of working, which is fantastic. But you also have to think about taking out the ones that no longer work, that are no longer sustainable. The feedback loop from policy implementation back to coordination and governance then are things like social learning to jointly iterate solutions within an experiment. And again, systems thinking to understand systems dynamic, more or less the same as Darwinian expectation. So that's the conceptual overview of what we found so far in terms of what strategic learning is. The final slide then I'll talk about is, okay, what does this mean for innovation-enhancing procurement? So John McHale mentioned ordinary capabilities, dynamic capabilities, and functional capabilities. One of the tricky things about dynamic capabilities, and because of that, the functional capabilities as well, I would suspect, is that these are quite difficult to develop, to build in an organization. And one of the reasons that they are quite difficult to build, and these differ from ordinary capabilities, which are easier to build because these are essentially best practices. The dynamic capabilities within commercial organizations, at least, and there's a lot of research has emerged from the commercial world, which is now being applied in the public sector. A lot of the thinking is that these dynamic capabilities are complex combinations of lower level capabilities. And trying to bring these together and trying to coordinate these within your organization to drive transformative change is tricky. So there's an emerging conversation happening in the policy world about how you actually go about building these capabilities. And that's not clear cut at the moment. One of the things that I'm suggesting in our conversations with Lina and Jakob is taking this idea of this complex combination of lower level capabilities, which we can identify, and then trying to figure out what are the types of learning we need to ensure success. That could potentially be a route into this. So to test that, or to kind of demonstrate what that project might be, and again, as I say, we're at a sketching out what this looks like point of view at this stage. So we've taken the Demand Acceleration Handbook that Lina and Jakob have put together, which gives a very detailed description of how you go about doing innovation-enhancing procurement. We've taken one dynamic capability from John McHale's work, which is assessing diffusion to other clients, users, or export markets. We try to figure out, okay, what the lower level capabilities look like that might contribute to that dynamic capabilities. What is this complex combination of lower level capabilities that we need to have in place to ensure that we can actually use and utilize this dynamic capability? And the final step we're looking at is, okay, what are the learning processes that would support that? So taking that high level dynamic capability, assessing diffusion to other clients, users, and export markets, what we think so far, the learning process, and you can see this, again, this is another level of complexity on the strategic process that I mentioned earlier. We're looking at things like entrepreneurial learning, so using existing resources to drive or for the creation, acquisition, and or development of skills, knowledge, and abilities necessary for an entrepreneurial activity. So you're looking at what you already have and how you can use that in new ways. Learning by doing, using, interacting, again, very traditional innovation and policy types of learning that we're very used to. Essentially getting people together, be they knowledge creators and users, or customers and knowledge creators, or customers and innovators, getting them to interact in a way to improve as things go. Sense giving, again, very traditional, disseminating an abstract vision to stakeholders. Market learning, development of new knowledge or the modification of existing knowledge about customers, competitors, and suppliers. And finally, this idea of second order learning, this idea of continuously reflecting, adapting, challenging assumptions and perceptions of problem solving, problem definition, dominant interpretive frames and worldview. And I suspect this second order and third order learning, particularly tying in with transformative innovation, links to the SDGs, and what's more or less sustainable. This is where probably more challenges will come up, I suspect, as we go on. So that's an overview of where we are. Again, quite conceptual at the moment because these are early days in this, but it gives you an idea of some of the new thinking that we're coming across and how we can start applying this in an IEP context. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Len. Now we definitely have food for thought. Thank you so much. So I guess we have a lot of questions and maybe some provocations as well regarding this. Is there anyone who spontaneously want to open up the floor? Oren, welcome.
Hello, thank you. Very thought-provoking series, and it's really interesting to see the kind of connections through those thinking. And I suppose culminating in the final one from yourself, Len, feels like the learning system itself of thinking of myself as a practitioner in procurement, that needs to follow a similar, if not the same, kind of adaptive approach in the way that it learns, so that anybody going through that system is benefiting from the learning that's happening practically. So, but having been through the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, there is nothing in there that is even remotely related to the challenges of the 21st century government and public service delivery. So, yeah, it feels like there's a thought process around those chartered institutes and what does good look like for that status, I suppose.
I have been reflecting during those three talks a lot about you and me, Lina, and our experiences from real life, since we work a lot with real life practice of innovation-enhancing procurement. And I see that you are raising your hand, Kjell Håkan, but first, Lina, do you have any reflections from real life experience, especially when it comes to learning and unlearning?
But I think we've started realizing we've been working with developing a framework that's very similar to the slide that Kjell Håkan showed, with these iterative boxes both towards the operation and the market. We've been doing that in practice for it's coming up to 4 years now, I think. And I think that the aspect of learning and the strategic learning and the power of learning, I think that is where we've realized that you cannot drive or scale these kind of processes without the learning aspect. I mean, the process without the learning is nothing. But once you start seeing how participating and leading this kind of process in the public sector can stimulate new ways of thinking and actually we start touching on the how to actually build capabilities that then the people participating in the processes can use in other procurement, in other processes than specifically the ones we are working with. It's a way to kind of put on new glasses in practice. That is something that is very powerful. We're very early, and as Len said, it's still conceptual, but we do have some empirical early findings that indicate that there is something in here that I'm very happy that we are exploring together, both in from a research perspective, from a policy perspective, and from a practical perspective in parallel. That's my reflection.
Thanks. Kjell Håkan.
Yes, I was just wanting to in some way linked to what Len talked about, which I think is really important to be able to translate into practice. But usually when we talk about procurement, we think about, as was discussed here, you define the need or something, and then you pursue that need in some way using different kind of approaches, which was covered by Mikael in his 4 quadrants and so on. But something that you basically miss, which links to Len's presentation, is that as soon as you think you will you do a procurement, especially if you think that this is an innovation policy issue, because that's my premise, that innovation procurement as an innovation policy instrument, not to improve the operations of a single thing in the public sector, but you use it as to drive demand in a transformative way. Now, in that second, you realize that, then you have to put this procurement in a bigger picture. Now, what is your theory of change? Why do you think that this procurement will drive and make any change on a societal or market level? And in that case, exactly, then you are into this situation that Len was talking about, because then you have to start to question your theory of change. In my view, theory of change is not something that you make to monitor and evaluate. The theory of change is the foundation for what you need to question through experimentation. So it forces you into this kind of second order and third order thinking. And for example, I give some training to companies that we fund because I find them always thinking too much in the engineering way, and I try to get them to apply discovery-driven planning, trying to answer the question, why do you think you will be successful? So what are your assumptions on regulatory, technical, commercial, societal, cultural? Why do you think you will be successful? Which creates them a kind of this theory of change, and then start to question that. Don't believe in what you think, and try to experimentally question that, and start with the deal killers, then with the strategic choices you make, and to operational lastly. Usually they start with operational, go to strategic, and address the deal killers lastly. And that kind of practice, to move that into practice, forces you into some sort of thinking that Len was addressing, at least in my mind. And it would be interesting to really think if any other kind of ideas, but that's my take to it, linking this, what Len was talking about, into practice.
Any thoughts on that?
Warren?
I think that's a really interesting point, and something which we did something recently with the Welsh government, the Welsh public sector, where you mentioned it, Mikael, I think, about a sandbox. So we called it the procurement reform sandbox, and we wanted to introduce kind of different ways of thinking to help navigate uncertainty, because the regulations, even more so in Wales, governing procurement will be changing imminently. The difference in Wales is that they've actually legislated for the well-being of generations who've yet to be born, and putting the sustainable development principle at the very heart of their kind of their constitution in essence. And so we're saying, right, well, almost forget the fact that the regulations are changing. What is it that you're hoping to achieve through your procurement process? And that was around, well, actually, we want to improve the well-being of our communities. We want to increase the impact that we're having for people who don't yet have a voice in that kind of public policy debate. And so, and that's being driven by the sustainable development principle. So what was fascinating by the end of it was the participants said, well, actually, this has nothing to do with the regulations. It's about, we need to improve the way that we communicate across our organizational units, entities with the market. We need to agree on and align on how we're going to prioritize. So kind of like, deprioritizing the low value add activities. And it was just getting people together. It was fascinating. So, and it kind of generated a real buzz with the policy team responsible for procurement, who's since saying, look, this completely goes outside of our frame of how we think about solving problems or addressing problems in the public sector procurement space. And so I think there's something in this around, like, as you said, it's the sustainable development goals should be our kind of framing, but there's something in, I think, thinking beyond your current lifetime, so that you become a responsible ancestor for those who will inherit your decisions, good or bad. So helping to minimize the bad, increase the good.
Yeah,
Thanks, Warren. Lina.
Yeah, that's a super interesting reflection, and it aligns very well with my experience as well. That when I work with municipalities, they may be that, okay, but we need a regulatory sandbox, for example, to not have to deal with the procurement principles, etc. But when you start diving deeper into it, you often realize that the problem is not in the legislation, and it's not in the procurement principles. Rather, you can use them as a driver and to guide you in stimulating competitiveness, etc. The problem is normally, from my experience, the internal processes in the organization, because they are very often built on predictability, and you want the public machinery to work efficiently. You don't want every time you need to buy something to start thinking about who needs to sign off and how does a budget process work. You need to have things a little bit lined out and in order, otherwise it's not efficient at all. And that follows the same kind of process. You define the need, you evaluate the solutions against that, and then you go implementing, and you know who needs to sign off of the budget and who needs to sign off of the plan, etc. And it's an efficient way of working, and it works when there is a predictability. But when there's not, that's when it doesn't work, and that's, I think, and that can create an enormous uncertainty in all the departments, like why we are not following the process we are supposed to follow, and is it a procurement, is it innovation, what is it? And that can be quite difficult to deal with. So it's a thing that my experience aligns very well with yours as well, Warren. So moving on to Len, what's your reflections and comments?
Thanks, Lina, and thanks for the comments as well so far. One of the interesting things, I guess, tie in with this conversation as well, in terms of how you can bring in this new way of thinking within a public sector organization. For me, it's an unknown at what level, I guess, you need to be hitting. So, is it the organization level? As in, do you need your organization to change to innovate its way of doing things to be more aligned with this new way of thinking, or do you need to focus on this idea of policy entrepreneurs, so that people within the organization that can think in these different ways, or are more comfortable thinking in these different ways, but can try to bring in this new way of thinking, knowing that the organization will throw spanners in the works, will put barriers in the way, and how you overcome those barriers or mitigate those barriers is a very interesting way of looking at this as well. And I'm not too sure which is the right answer, or do you need to do both at the same time? But it would be, as we go on and talk about this in practice, it'll be interesting to see what works and what doesn't work, I guess, between those two.
Mikael, what's your reflection?
Yes, just as a footnote, or to add another level of complexity, since I know that Lina is lately too much into complexity theories and complex adaptive systems. One of the issues that I don't have an answer for, but I clearly see as a limitation of the effectiveness of innovation-enhancing procurement, is that, and it's very much in line with the reflection that Michelle Håkan was making earlier, is that we have two levels of uncertainty here. On the one hand is the contemporaneous uncertainty, so we are going to buy something, and we don't know exactly what we are going to buy, because that good or that service or that technology doesn't exist. So we need to deploy and we need to develop that first. But we also have another level of prospective uncertainty because we don't know how the market is going to react to that good once the good exists. And that's where I think in that interaction between the current uncertainty and the prospective uncertainty, where the public sector feels a little bit lost, because we are used, the public sector is usually used, I need pens, I go to the market, I find the pens, and I know how my consumers, internal consumers, or internal users are going to react to that good because we know how to use it. And we know how it's going to, the IP is going to be owned, and we know how the dissemination of that good is going to be owned. If we need a printer, if the printer is consuming more or less energy, we can measure those things. But when we are jumping into the realm of innovation procurement, we don't know what's the good is going to be like, and we don't know how the market can respond to that good later, internal or external. And that's where I think that the procurement regulations at the moment, they don't really match the societal needs, because we don't know. We simply don't have an answer for that. And I think that with these capabilities, we also need to think how we can build and how we can try. It's not an ex-ante exercise with total level of certainty, but we can try to anticipate those potential scenarios that may stem from the goods that we are developing, which we don't know. So it's a little bit of perspective, and that's why I was just browsing through Warren, the link that you just put on the chat, and I believe I haven't read it in detail, obviously, but I saw a little bit of using foresight methods and how these prospective tools and techniques that we have could also be embedded into procurement when we are thinking of this future demand or those future needs that society may have. We know we are going to have a problem, but we need to anticipate that eventual demand. So for me, there is a big gap still there on how to deal with this current prospective needs and capabilities. Big gap there.
Lina?
Yeah, I think I completely agree about this uncertainty and the challenges dealing with uncertainty. And this is one of my kind of favorite topics. I love dealing with uncertainty, because what's so fascinating about it is that it's so humanly normal and natural to deal with uncertainty. We deal with uncertainty like all the times. I mean, we wouldn't have a betting industry, we wouldn't have the Olympics, we wouldn't have anything if we didn't know how to deal with uncertainty. We that's what we do when we raise our kids. I mean, everything is dealing with uncertainty. But for some reason, we have this idea when we go into our professional environment or public administration, that is not the way it's supposed to be in that context. And I think that's kind of a bit of the glasses shift. And I have an example. I've started telling when I do workshops about this, and I talk about another context when we deal with uncertainty. We have strategies for minimizing risk when we deal with uncertainty, and that's the Tinder dating. That's the app dating. That's exactly the same thing. We have no idea we have a rough idea about what we're after, but normally not more. And the more detailed we go into the specific requirements, the more difficult it gets. It just creates a false sense of security. We need a different kind of strategy where it's not just picking one winner from the one who can, give us the best bid. We have to do something differently. We know this intuitively. It's about taking small risks in the beginning, see how things develop, maybe having different kind of prospects in parallel to see where things go. Create a situation where we can abort mission whenever we feel things are not going the right way, and just see how things unfold over time. And we all know this, and we do it. And creating processes for dealing with uncertainty, for example, in public administration, we can learn from how we deal with uncertainty in other ways of life. And this is quite interesting, I would say quite powerful. So dealing with complexity is not just some abstract, different thing that we don't know how to deal with. We know it, we just need to translate it into different environments, I would say. Håkan.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what is built into the demand acceleration is that exactly as you work with entrepreneurial discovery, as when the risks are high, you do small steps, following like Saraswati's affordable loss principles. Even in public sector, affordable loss principles should apply, because most things fail in innovation. We are power law distributed out. We have power law distributed outcomes and not normally distributed outcomes. But I wanted to bring something else, talking about foresights, and I see foresights are becoming much more popular. There was a wave of foresights when I was in the corporate business in large corporations, and we used a lot of foresights, thinking that kind of predictive thinking would make us more successful in the future, and it doesn't. It's an illusion that you will with foresights know what will happen in the future. So have you all, and you that have been working with foresights, have you seen foresights being like, this basically viewed as assumptions which you can base experimentation on, like using foresights really to bring out from the head what you think of the future, and then have another process that really tries to kill it or validate it. So it doesn't become like the planning process with foresights, rather than really trying to address what Len was talking about, using foresights as a learning tool to really question any thoughts you have in your head, because usually most things you have in your head is wrong.
Yes, Warren.
Well, I absolutely. I think it was an experiment in itself, just to kind of get these kind of principles into the minds of the teams that were involved. And I think what it basically did was completely debunk the assumption that the regulations are currently or will either enable or constrain them in some kind of way to help them achieve what they're trying to achieve. Actually, it was just about their own willingness to kind of talk to people that they hadn't up until now spoken to, or to overcome some kind of convention that was established as an organizational policy or process in order to get something done. So it was like, right, well, actually, we can say it's not the regulations, it's down to our behaviors and our mindset as an organizer, as a team, as individuals. So I think that was a useful conclusion to that initial experiment. So I think we're still going to see where we can take that next as a kind of an experiment in itself.
Yes, and I actually also have a reflection connecting the dots here, and basically what I see in front of me is one of your slides, Jon Mikael, where you showed how the purchasing process begin with identifying needs and go on. But if we connect this with Kjell Håkans saying that we need purchasing to drive innovation, not the way around. What we have seen, and now I'm actually looking at you, Lina, we have seen in practice that when we regard this as an innovation process, it might very well start before we actually know we have a need. Rather, we might have a possibility. So I think, Lina, for example, the experience from Helsingborg, this Reko Lab, was very obvious from that perspective. Could you just briefly tell us about that? Because I think that's kind of interesting here.
That's a great example that turns this kind of procurement process overboard, I would say. This is circular. This is in Helsingborg, the city. They've got the infrastructure in place for circularity of wastewater. It's quite an advanced system that connects the residential areas with a wastewater plant, etc. And so you can basically have this closed circular loop within the city, where you use the wastewater, you produce fertilizers, you can use that to grow food, and it goes back in the system. But the problem right now is that everything is in place, but the products are currently not used. They are R&D is done, etc. And now it's about figuring out who will use them and what are the requirements so they can be used, basically classic innovation. And then you have a whole value network, and you don't know which role the city is going to take. The city is in one way the supplier, but it might also be the buyer, or a development partner, or some other role. So you don't know if whoever is going to buy this product, there might be the city, might be a public company, might be private farmers, might be someone else. So you need to do this whole entrepreneurial discovery process within the principles of public procurement, because it might end up with a procurement, but it might not. And that turns the whole procurement process overboard, because you don't start with identifying a need. You start with identifying a vision and a product, a raw material, and how to go to value creation from there. There can very well be procurements happening, but you don't know between whom and you don't know what. And that is super interesting, I think, and very relevant also for circular procurement to turn that overboard a bit. Yeah, Shiloka.
Yeah, it's so I have to jump it, because when you say procurement drives or innovation, procurement drives the innovation process, then procurement can come in several steps of the innovation process in different ways. That's why you have this interaction. Depending on the phase of the innovation process, you use procurement in different ways, and you can abandon it in certain, because now it starts running with venture capital and those, and then by the end in the innovation process, you come again into to really get a kind of a bridgehead on the market through the procurement. So that's so important, that you don't have a procurement process used to by innovation. No, you let the innovation process be as it is, and then use procurement to drive it in different ways and in different stages. And that's a completely different mindset. That and it's a good. That was really what I tried to say in the beginning.
And then I need to fill in there. That often this question comes like, but when does the procurement start? When do we need to start following the procurement principles if we don't know if it's going to be procurement? Well, why do you want to be outside of them to start with? What is the reason for not being, so to say, inside and following the procurement processes if they are about stimulating competition? Why would you even want to start outside and work only with companies you know, for example? Then you don't have this problem of when to step in and how to make that transition work. But here we get to, from our experience, one of the key questions saying we want to work within the procurement principles, but it's not the procurement because we haven't had the budget, we haven't signed it off, we haven't defined the need. So you cannot get access to the procurers because we need these sign-ups first, for example. And this is exactly where one of the key conflicts or big knots happens in the processes. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is also extremely interesting from a learning point of view, because what we see in practice is also that, for example, procurers get involved much earlier in the process than the actual procurement, and
Yes.
start to they start to learn that about innovation, for example, in the innovation process. So I remember, Lina, you once mentioned a meeting where a lot of people with different professions actually did meet for the first time.
Yes. It's also in one of the cities we've been working with, where people who've been working like as procurers and as innovation managers and digitalization strategies, etc., they had never met. They didn't know each other. They started like shaking hands, presenting themselves by name. And of course, it's very difficult to solve problems together and collaborate if you have no idea who the other people are. There's a lot of these ideas about the ones over there, things like this, etc. But I think it's quite powerful to just put them in the same room and make them work together, kind of. Yeah. Warren.
I get back to our procurement reform sandbox. We were actually trying to engage with people who weren't procurement people, but who orbit or interact with procurement process in some shape or form. And it was the same. The finance business partner, who is there to help make the money flow around the system, had never spoken to the digital delivery team, and none of them had ever spoken to the procurement team. So there's this kind of like we were being a relationship broker simply by getting people together in this space. And it was incredible when, as you said, they're pointing the finger over to, say, finance, saying your rules and your governance don't work for me, and they're saying, well, your procurement governance doesn't work for the way that our money flows, and so there's this kind of like everybody was kind of ossified through governance, their own internal governance being vertical and siloed, rather than thinking, well, actually, as an organization, what do we need to do that's different, that enables money, delivery, value, etc., to coexist in a harmonious way? Is so fascinating. But yeah, I think it's getting people together, right? Again.
Yeah.
Mm. May I ask then, if we take the perspective of system innovation, and Kjell Håkan, you showed one of the slides where you actually also pointed out that it's not only about learning from a public organization side, it's also learning and development on the private side, so to speak, or the firms. What's your thoughts about learning from the private side as well? Do we need to elaborate anything from that perspective as well? Because now we are talking about learning in public organizations. What about the private firms?
Yeah, and that was the thing I brought up after John Mikael's presentation, that it's as important, really, the evolution of the business side and the market is as important. The public is in transformative innovation just a catalyzer, something that facilitates, can catalyze, can promote, but it's really happening on the streets or in the market, because that's where the transformative innovation policy is implemented. It's not implemented through the public organizations. It's implemented by the civil society and market and so on. So you have to be able. One of the challenges, and I usually draw when I look at the third generation policies, I do two like domains. One is directionality and demand, because they are linked together. You try to through demand drive directionality, and it's a learning process there. Now on the other side, you have experimentation, coordination, learning that really gives, in some way, tries to validate what the directionality part and the demands part is like giving guidance or direction for, because that can be completely wrong also. You have to always question your directionality and the demand you want to drive. So there's two interplaying parts in the third generation policy. The one that really tries to drive something where demand and the directionality, and the second with coordination, experimentation, and learning, that tries to really dig into and question everything and try to find paths that are successful, that you can scale up. And the interplay between them is really important, even and when you put the innovation procurement process in this, because you have both parties and they are like moving in this third generation innovation policy between those parts that drives directionality and the other ones that basically you could see questioning and tries to validate directionality and demand and see does it works, because the challenge is always between getting the micro aspects, sustainable businesses, to really deliver the macro aspects, which usually are emergent properties, which you cannot find in when you talk about system innovation. Usually it's emergent properties that you cannot find in the subparts in the society. It's an collective kind of results of the interaction between companies, people, consumers, producers. And this is really the challenge we are facing when we move into transformative innovation policy.
Yes, just as a follow-up, and I totally agree with Kjell Håkan's provocation here. And to me, that raises the question of the ownership. Why does, in a context of transformative innovation, has the public sector need to own the procurement process? Because when we start with the procurement process, it's always the need identification. But in many cases, as I call the radars or the antennas of the public sector are very limited. And those needs transcend society. So society needs to be part of this. Society should be catalyzing the procurement process instead of the procurers and the public administration being the owners of the procurement process. And there I see a conflict between the coordination, the participation, societal engagement, and who in the end is going to put the budgets, who is going to own the procurement process, and who is going to run the procurement process. Because I see that in many cases, limiting the ownership of the procurement processes to the public sector can also limit the potential of the instrument itself. So I have a trade-off, or I believe there is a trade-off there between the ownership and the usership. I believe that in many cases, public procurers would become the users of the procurement process instead of owning, and other actors that are more aware of the societal need could become the owners of the procurement process. And in that conflict, maybe is where innovation or the management of innovation could happen, and where the management of innovation could enrich the procurement process itself. But of course, that having said, to procurers, I don't think they will like this side of the story where they have to leave the power of owning the procurement process. That's my guess from my experience, at least. But I think there is a hidden potential there.
May I add to that? And back to the what I and Lina was talking a bit earlier about it, if we put the procurement in the center, we usually probably get our mindsets wrong. It's really the innovation process that is in the center. And then, as you pointed out, demand can be driven by many factors, and the corporate fabric in the society, and society is the one that really drives demand, and not the public sector. The public sector can always like catalyze and promote and so on. So that's so important to really see once again the message: let procurement drive the innovation process, not the vice versa. And in that case, the procurement process doesn't become the center. It's the question in how and when should I use procurement to drive the innovation process? Should I use it in the very beginning when there's nobody there, or should I use it to drive something that is already happening? So the strategy for procurement from the public side is really to see in what way can I use procurement to drive the innovation process that happens outside the public sector. And that is another kind of mindset than usually you find when we talk about innovation procurement.
Thank you very much, Håkan. And we are soon approaching something, depending on which time zone you are in. So let's round up this session. And both from me and Lina, we are so grateful that you have took your time for you three to prepare your presentations and give us your thoughts, and also the discussions afterwards. And let me conclude with some yes, I have written down here. First of all, I think most important of all is to use procurement to drive the innovation process, as Håkan says, not vice versa. And if we do that, if we have that perspective, then a lot of good things will follow in how we approach this. I also think that dealing with uncertainty is something that we come back to all the time. And why not embrace Lina's example then with app dating like Tinder's and vice versa, because I strongly believe that we can learn a lot from that. So learning from Tinder dating is, first of all, to actually eliminate the red flags, to really sort out those signals that this is not a very good behavior. I don't want to engage with that type of people. Håkan mentioned pick the willings, which means that, of course, we need to find those one who won't engage. And last but not least, I think love is an emergent property. So that is actually what is deriving from that kind of process. Like in innovation-enhancing procurement, isn't it?
Exactly. The magic will happen. The question is where and when. Yes.
Okay. Having that said,
thank you.
Thank you very much.